You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined this week by Oliver Camacho and Matthew Cummings. All right, this week, live from the Boston Early Music Festival, Oliver goes inside the huddle with Jonathan Woody. The bass-baritone and composer just wrapped up performances at the festival's centerpiece opera Circé as one of only 2 black artists in the cast of dozens. But he's not calling for the cancellation of Baroque music altogether, like some people we know. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, the plot of Die Frau ohne Schatten explained at last, despite my best efforts. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Stitcher and Spotify. You can click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit that plus sign. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot take at operaboxscore@gmail.com. You'll get an OBS beer coaster and an OBS lapel pin just for sharing your own hot take. Oliver, I want you to know something very important. As you know, I am on TikTok, and I started getting tennis TikToks this week. And my only explanation is that the algorithm has figured out that you and I know each other.
It's listening to him talk about tennis every week, and it thinks that it's you.
So I was at the Boston Early Music Festival until yesterday, and last week was the second week of Roland Garros of the French Open, and I had to try to not, look at results because I had pre-recorded. I had set my DVR to record some matches, but you can't avoid it. Every time you open, as you just mentioned, every time you open up Instagram, for example, you see results, and I can't not look at my thirst traps on Instagram. So I found out that my dear Carlos Alcaraz, my new favorite, cramped up in the semifinal against Novak Djokovic, which cleared the path for him to take his 23rd Grand Slam title, which puts him ahead of Rafael Nadal by 1 and ties him with Serena Williams as the most Grand Slams in the Open era.
Oh, wow.
The grandest, slammiest winner.
Yes, and there's a chance that he can beat both of these records. The chance he can beat Serena Williams' record and improve upon it if people like Carlos Alcaraz don't cramp up in the semifinals. So mad at you, Carlitos, but yeah, congratulations. No way.
Matt Cummings, who's cramping up in your world?
I just can't believe that they already wrote an opera about Cersei Lannister. Hundreds of years before the show even happened.
I think there is, isn't there? Am I making this up? Isn't there an opera based on Game of Thrones already?
Isn't that Lord of the Rings or no?
No, I think it's Game of Thrones. I could be completely wrong. Listeners, please email us at operaboxscore@gmail.com for that beer coaster and to possibly correct me. You too can feel like Oliver Camacho by correcting me at operaboxscore@gmail.com. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
So Jonathan Woody is a bass baritone whom I recognize from the early music circuit. He sings with Trinity Wall Street. He sings with Boston Early Music Festival and at the Staunton Music Festival. And he's also a composer. He's been commissioned by a number of organizations like the Handel and Haydn Society and some others, which I can't think of right now. And I just seeing him in the social media circles that I'm in, I realized that he is a very, interesting artist who does center his identity and is getting jobs despite that, because he's actually a very good singer. So we'll begin by listening to something that's just for you, Weston.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
These are the opening bars of Du Yoon's Angel's Bone, and the very first voice you will hear is that of Jonathan Woody. Just the opening notes of Du Yun's Angel's Bone. And that first voice you heard was that of my guest today, bass-baritone Jonathan Woody. Welcome.
Hi.
He waved, everybody, if you didn't notice.
This is a podcast.
So there are many different topics we could talk about when we're talking about you as a singer and also as a composer and as sort of a classical music agitator / advocate. But we're going to begin with your work in contemporary music. It seems like many singers who have your specific skill set, you either go the early music route or you go the new music route or you go the ensemble singing route, and you decided to go with all of them.
Exactly, yeah.
So you worked on Angel's Bone. You're on the commercial recording. You were also in Ellen Reid's Prism. Was that at Prototype or was that the post-Prototype?
Also part of Prototype, and then we went on tour with it to LA Opera, to the Red Cat down there in LA Opera.
I have never been to Prototype Festival. Is it anything like the Boston Early Music Festival? Are there a lot of recorders being played in hotel rooms?
It's kind of like flipping the Boston Early Music Festival upside down, you know? But yeah, Prototype is a very, very cool festival that they do in New York in January. And it features all kinds of new operatic works. And there's usually some larger ones and some smaller ones. And yeah, being able to be part of several festivals and be part of a few different Pulitzer Prize winning works was really very cool and very kind of informative to me of what the world of contemporary opera is like nowadays.
Mm-hmm. You were also in Breaking the Waves in the New York premiere? Or?
In the New York premiere, that's right. And, you know, these works, all three of the works you just mentioned, Prism, Angel's Bone, and Breaking the Waves, relate to very contemporary issues and issues in general about, often about gender and about power and about, you know, where those things clash and where we as a society don't, you know, we don't look in the cracks, you know, of what sort of these kinds of folks are going through. And I think that's a snapshot of what contemporary opera, I think, in the 2010s and 2020s is like.
Yeah, it's interesting that I feel like the opera world right now is all deciding, you know, especially after the pandemic and the social unrest of 2020, that we need to be more inclusive. Great, you know, and I think one way is to have new works that tell new stories, but there's also this other avenue of, you know, especially in early music, we see like, who are our people? Like, and then all of a sudden, Joseph Bellone is like the most important composer of the year, and you know, we're finding all these marginalized or disenfranchised female composers who wrote, you know, mostly choral music, you know. And yeah, so and you're involved in all of that, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, you know, increasingly more and more. And actually, it's funny you mentioned Bologna. Well, first of all, you probably know that there's a movie coming out called Chevalier.
It's already out, I think.
It's out,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And it looks very good. I should probably go see it. I didn't realize it was already out.
Yeah, it's already gone to streaming. I'm sure it's already out of the theater, so.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, he's having this moment right now. And it's interesting because I came across his music almost 15 years ago. When I was working with Tafelmusik still as a student. They have a training program, and they had a CD called The Black Mozart, in French, I think it was, Le Mozart Noir. And it's interesting because at that time, you know, that was kind of seen as let's celebrate that there's this figure that we think of as a Black Mozart. And of course, times have changed since 2009 to today, where it's like, if anything, Mozart is the white chevalier, right? So, or maybe let's like not use these kinds of terms.
Yeah, it's comparisons. Like, yeah, you know? Like there has to be a binary. It's like there's the white one and the black one.
And, you know, Chevalier's life was so interesting, aside from being like not only a famous composer, and also he founded an orchestra in France, which still exists to this day. He also was a championship fencer, and was actually sort of the son of both like nobility and an enslaved person. And it, to me, that life story is like such a big part of why I think classical music is interesting and why it matters, because it's not just the story of like one genius sitting in a room and writing perfect works of music. It's the story of people's actual lives and how they fit together. And the music is kind of an expression of all that.
I did not prepare you for this topic, but I think you might have something to say about it. There is a very famous classical music agitator out there. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he has a podcast. And he used to work for classical radio in, I want to say, Minnesota.
Garrett McQueen.
Right. I don't want to, because he's been a guest, and like I actually I think his work is very important. But sometimes he gets under my skin because he just wants to burn it all down.
Sure.
And he wants to cancel Handel, you know? And I would assume that Handel is a big part of your career.
Yeah. Actually, when he made that tweet saying he wanted to cancel Handel, I tweeted at him. I don't know if you saw that. And we kind of had a little exchange because, you know, the research has shown lately that Handel created a lot of the operas he created and funded his opera company through profits from the slave trade. Mm-hmm. Handel himself wasn't a slave owner, but he did use the wealth that the slave trade was creating to create his work. And, you know, that's obviously problematic. But I think for me, the answer is not, okay, we can never do Handel again. The answer is, when we do Handel, let's talk about that. And let's make sure everybody knows about that. And, for example...
don't erase the history.
Don't erase the history. Contextualize the history. For example, Handel and Haydn Society, just this past weekend here in Boston, did a program called Crossing the Deep, which took Handel's music, put it next to the music of enslaved people that was being written at the same time, and had a discussion about how those things related to each other. And it was led by, you know, someone you've probably had in the podcast before, Reggie Mobley, and Anthony Tressick King, who's another great conductor. And, you know, their approach to this music, both being Black men who descended from, you know, enslaved people in North America, gives it not just, you know, sort of validity, but I think it really asks the audiences to say, like, what do we think about this? Is this okay? And for me, it's the question. It's not let's cancel. It's let's ask questions.
Well, you did bring up Handel and you did bring up Boston, so we can now talk about why we get to be in the same room together. Is that you are in the middle of a production of a French Baroque opera, Desmarais' Circé, and your character is sort of a genderless sorcerer god type of person who like tells the white people that they're okay.
Yeah, you know, I can sum it up a little differently. You know, so it's an ancient Greek myth, and Circé is the queen on an island, and she has the Greek soldiers who show up and
from the Trojan War.
It's Odysseus,
Yeah.
and she falls in love with him, and then, you know, turns his men into pigs, and then tries to convince him to stay on the island with her forever. And that's where
she uses magic to do it.
She uses magic
like
to do it.
Alcina moment, yeah.
And that's where I appear, because I sort of represent the god of love, Cupid, and I come on and say, hey, people, why don't you all stay together forever on this beautiful island? You know, you don't have to go back to your home country, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it ends not so happily, and you can check out BIMF's website if you want to learn more. But it is interesting that is the kind of role I often play in a Baroque work, because these works tend to tell similar sorts of stories that are actually, from their point of view, looking back on the Greek mythology, which they very much held up as their sort of model of an ideal society, an ideal westernized culture. And then now we in the 21st...
There were air quotes there, by the way, folks.
Sorry, yeah, air quote. And then we in the 21st century sort of look back on this time, on the Baroque time, and we do a similar thing. We sort of think this is high culture, and this is something that you have to sit in a fancy concert hall and wear a bow tie and a tuxedo, and, you know, you have to just
wearing a bow tie is fine, nothing else. So.
And like, it is a conflict for me sometimes, because I love the music. I couldn't tell you why. I've loved it since I was a kid. Something about it just speaks to me. But I see the ways in which it's very hard to tell somebody, particularly somebody who, you know, is just going about their day-to-day life in America, that they should care about this. And I guess what I would say is, I don't think I can tell anybody what they should care about. But what I want to do is share my love for the music, and try to perform it in a way that other people at least see that, or at least see that there's something inspirational and joyful. And then maybe they think, oh, maybe I can enjoy this as well.
Do you feel like you need to be an ambassador to your community? You're Black, by the way. I don't know if you knew that, but
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. And in fact, my entryway into particularly early music was more or less because so I grew up in Washington, D.C., and there are a couple of Baroque ensembles there. And when I was a student, still in college, one of them was rehearsing in my college auditorium. And I kind of wandered in during their rehearsal, you know, snuck in and sat in the audience and was enraptured by this music. And I looked up on the stage, and there were 2 Black faces in a sea of white orchestral musicians. And in that moment, I thought, well, they're there, so maybe I can be there. Yeah. And so for me, it's so important that I be that person now that I have made it into this very sort of gate-kept professional.
I mean, for the U.S., to me, it is the ne plus ultra of early music, this festival and what they do here. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. And I mean, look, Vox Luminis is here, Douce Memoire is here. All the great, you know, European ensembles have come to this festival to be heard by Americans. You know?
Yep, and I think you're right. And I've always personally thought of this festival as being that zenith of Baroque music in America. And this is my first festival. Well, it's the first one since the pandemic, but it's the first one where I've been invited to sort of be in a featured role. And I do see part of my responsibility as being a face that somebody out in the audience, somebody who might have snuck into our rehearsal and is listening and is getting enraptured, can see my face and say, hey, I can come in here too.
And there's also a Black dancer in the troupe this year too. So there are actually 2 Black faces on the stage this year.
And I mean, what does frustrate me a little bit is that, you know, 15 years later, there's still only 2 Black faces. That is a little frustrating. And I think part of that is that times really have changed. You know, I think the way we're thinking about race and talking about race has changed since I was a college student. And I think nowadays there's a lot more questioning of a sort of default European or Eurocentric way of doing things. And for better or for worse, classical music is super European. And it doesn't have to be forever. And maybe that's can segue
it's a conflict.
into...
It's a conflict for me because I am pretty conservative in my tastes, and I would rather expand the canon by doing more early music or finding more bel canto. And I know that I need to adapt my sensibility to appreciate what's being the new music. And I actually really like Champion. I don't know if you saw it, you know, but I thought it was great. I thought Ryan Speecher Green was incredible in it, and Eric Owens. But I like what I like. I like my Mozarts. I like my Handels, you know, and I'm worried that personalities like Garrett McQueen, who want to like burn it all down, are going to, he has a big platform, and that maybe people who feel disenfranchised by, you know, the standard repertoire will leave it. And then that creates a problem for audiences here at Boston Early Music Festival. And I don't know what's happening this year. I know it's like the first live festival back since 2019, but audiences are down.
Yeah, I've noticed that too.
Yeah, it's very alarming to me. But we should talk about your work as a composer. Is that where you were trying to lead me?
That was where I was kind of trying
Yeah,
to
go
go.
on.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, and I agree with you, I like my Handel, I like my Mozart, I like my Monteverdi. And part of what I like about those composers is that I think you actually don't need a music degree to feel that music. You really don't. I think you can sit down, listen to it, close your eyes, take an edible, and, you know, have a good time, and so when I compose, I want the experience to be the same way. I don't want to write music that's so hard to understand that you have to go ask somebody else what the heck is going on. Like, I want it to just groove. I want people to be able to connect to it. And I like to write music that sounds like it could be Handel, or it sounds like it could be Baroque music. And in fact, I'm trying to get this term started, American Baroque. We in the early music scene like to talk about the different countries where the composers come from. So there's French Baroque, and there's Italian Baroque, and there's English Baroque. And I want to create this term called American Baroque, which is what this music might have sounded like if everybody in this country got to participate in it.
Just a few minutes ago, you were saying you don't know why you are so drawn to this style of music, but after hearing you sing and listening to your work and your performances, you use rhetoric when you sing, and I think there is, and like people can say that I'm such a full of myself, but I think there is this thing about people who specialize in early music that they get rhetorical devices and they understand how the audience can receive more information if you lean into the rhetoric. And that also, I think, happens in contemporary music. It's like, how do we make this more obvious for the audience? You have to find the rhetoric in it, And I think that's just a different mindset than people who just want to sing beautifully, that just want to sing their Brahms songs and just sing super legato and with the most beautiful tone they can muster, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Like, give me Crystal Ludwig singing Brahms, all day.
And which I still want to have as well, but I agree with you 100%.
So you have composed, you've been commissioned by Trinity Wall Street, the Seattle Song Salon, the Handel and Haydn Society, and Chanticleer. I guess I wanted to talk to you about Trinity a little bit because they've also featured you as a soloist. You're in that Israel and Egypt recording. And I guess you can credit maybe your young compositional life to the disgraced former leader of Trinity.
Yeah, I know how to pick them in terms of mentors, but I did meet Julian Wachner as a student at McGill University. And then when I graduated with my master's degree there, he hired me to be in the choir at Trinity Wall Street. And during that time, we did a lot of really interesting and varied performances. We did an entire cycle of the Bach cantatas, all 200 of them, over about 5 years. We also were performing in the chorus of the 3 contemporary works that you mentioned at the top of the show, Angel's Bone, Prism, and Breaking the Waves. And I would say that my entry into that sort of network and that environment of contemporary music definitely was something that happened because of my association with Trinity. I probably wouldn't have had that sort of direct track otherwise. So I have to give Trinity credit for a lot of my development as an artist. Now, I think you have to sort of take everything with a grain of salt. And it's true that working with this director, there were dark times and there were moments of, behavior that was absolutely not acceptable. And I think ultimately, being, let go from that job was probably the right time and place. I also have
being let go from the job, not you.
Him being let go. Sorry,
Yeah.
Him being let go. I also have recently left the job, and I think it's a similar thing of like I kind of have to spread my wings at this point and move on and really take my career track in my own hands and on my own terms. But I will forever sort of have to express some gratitude for the experiences that I got there. And also the community of fellow singers and players that I built over the years there, they're still the closest people in my life.
Oh, we can bring it into sports terms now.
Oh, yeah.
So Trinity is one of the most elite church gigs you can get, essentially. Obviously, they're doing more than Sunday service music, but essentially that's the core of that job is you sing Sunday services. But there's also these opportunities to record oratorios and to be in the chorus of an operette prototype, So these are really top-level musicians. And I just wanted to try to tie into the sports thing because that's what we do here.
Sure.
You are a consort singer. And what sport is most like consort singing?
I would definitely say it's something like a team sport. And it's a team sport where everybody maybe has a slightly different role. Even basketball, you could say. In high school, my high school is actually a kind of a basketball powerhouse.
You graduated from high school, though, right?
I did. DeMatha Catholic High School in Hyattsville, Maryland. We've had several NBA players come out of there, and so
Can you name any one of them?
I'm such not a sports guy, but Adrian Dantley is
Okay.
probably like the most famous.
Okay, cool.
But then also, is it Jarrett Jackson?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Who I think played for Oklahoma Thunder and now maybe plays somewhere else. He was there the same time as me. Anyway.
That'll give some of our listeners a boner. So, obviously.
And I might have gotten his name wrong. Sorry. At any rate, the culture of team sports was actually really strong in my high school. Almost everybody played some sport. Now, I was terrible at sports, but fortunately, the music department also had that culture in my high school. So I was in the band and in the choir, and in my choir, our choir teacher encouraged us, in fact, to call him Coach, and he insisted that we all have a team nickname. My nickname was just Woody because my last name, and it did really sort of engender this sense that like your job as a member of a team is both to do what you're supposed to do well, but also to look out for your teammates. And, you can't just push everyone aside to stand in front. The whole team sinks or swims based on if everybody is on the same page. So maybe it's a swim team or something like that, or track and field, where everyone does like a slightly different thing. Like you've got your shot put and you've got your archery and you've got your, 500 meter dash. And, there's going to be someone who's the best at each one of those things. But the team doesn't do well unless everybody is hitting at all cylinders. And I do feel like ensemble singing and consort singing in particular, concert singing being, when you sing, basically you're the only one on your part.
And you have to be able to fluctuate between the choral sound and then when it's your line to add tone color back in and phrasing more deliberate, etc.
And, you mentioned rhetoric a little bit ago, and I think that's one of the places where it really comes in handy to have that. And I just wanted to say that, rhetoric is something that I think I first experienced or encountered growing up in Black church, watching the preacher build the pace of the sermon, which in my denomination was AME, but I know this is true for a lot of Black churches. The sermon starts off spoken, and at a certain point, and you don't even perceive it, it becomes sung. And the organist catches it. And at a certain point, the organist starts to punctuate what the preacher says or is now singing with organ chords. Yeah. And it's super cool. And
the congregation is involved.
And the congregation hoots and hollers, and they stand up and they clap, and sometimes they sing, and sometimes they faint. It's really quite an example of the power of rhetoric in a room. The preacher holds everybody in the room in the palm of their hand. And I grew up just experiencing that every Sunday and not thinking too much about it because it was just what was going on around me. But at a certain point, you realize, oh, yeah, that's rhetoric. And when I was in graduate school and I was learning about the sort of formal history of rhetoric, I was like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, yeah, that's just that. So I think one of the things I really love about being in an ensemble is having the opportunity to do all those seamless transitions like you talked about, to step forward, take the stage, own the stage, and then step back and say, here, colleague, now you do it.
Yeah.
Prepare the hymn, prepare the song. The timbrel he'll bring, the timbrel he'll bring, the cheerful psaltery bring along. The cheerful psaltery bring along. The cheerful psaltery bring along, and harp with pleasant string, and harp with pleasant string. With pleasant string, the timbrel hither bring. The timbrel hither bring. Prepare the hymn, prepare the song. The timbrel hither bring, the timbrel hither bring. The cheerful psaltery bring along. The cheerful psaltery bring along, and harp with pleasant string, and harp with pleasant string. The timbrel hither bring. The timbrel hither bring.
A little bit of Handel's Israel and Egypt. To God our strength, sing loud and clear. We heard Jonathan Woody with Trinity Wall Street and He Who Shall Not Be Named conducting.
There's so many of those now.
That
It's
really doesn't
unfortunate.
narrow it down, I was going to say.
It's like, I don't know. You could be talking about anyone.
My thanks to Jonathan Woody for taking the time during a very busy week for these artists. And in the coming weeks, we will have some more content from the festival, some free throws, and another interview with German soprano Dorothee Mielz.
This is why I love Boston. You know, you just send Oliver there just, for a week, and you come back with enough content for a month. That's what it's all about.
A veritable treasure trove.
I don't have to do a damn thing except to do the 2-minute drill, which is right now.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
BBC's Cardiff Singer of the World has announced its 16 finalists advancing in this week's final competition, including 5 sopranos, 3 mezzo-sopranos, 3 tenors, a baritone and a bass-baritone, and 3 basses. No Americans or countertenors made the cut this year, so we declined to name any finalist in protest. Ryan Bancroft will conduct the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, and friend of the show Michael Christie will conduct the Welsh National Opera Orchestra in the coming rounds, and we will report on the results next week.
Juilliard has fired composition professor Robert Beezer after an independent investigation found, quote, credible evidence supporting the allegations of sexual misconduct laid out in Band magazine last year. The investigation found that Beezer, quote, repeatedly misrepresented facts about his actions, that he had at least one unreported relationship, and that he, quote, engaged in conduct which interfered with individuals' academic work.
Jonathan Sumption, Lord Sumption, has resigned from the board of English National Opera in an act of protest against funding cuts from Arts Council England. Said Sumption, Arts Council England forces a model which artistically and financially is no more than a delayed death sentence. He said, referring to the council's orders to move ENO out of London.
Next year, Spoleto Festival USA will premiere Ruinous Gods, a chamber opera about refugee children by French-Lebanese composer Lael Shaker and librettist Lisa Schlesinger. I hope that this provides us with the means to interrogate our legacy, the state of the world as we are leaving it to our children, said Shaker. Ruinous Gods follows Spoleto's Pulitzer Prize-winning premiere of Omar at last year's festival.
Mallorca's Teatro Principal de Palma has removed the stage director Hugo de Ana from its upcoming production of La Traviata after complaints of inappropriate comments by him towards members of the artistic team. Citing the company's psychosocial risk protocol, Teatro Principal terminated the director's contract, quote, to promote coexistence and a good working environment for the production. Traviata keeps its scheduled premiere date later this week.
It's award season. Nominations for the Opus Classic Awards include multiple nods for male soprano Bruno de Sa and his album Roma Travestita, which includes a vocal solo album, world premiere recording, and Singer of the Year. And you heard about Bruno de Sa right here on OBS. Finnish soprano Sonja Hernen won first prize in the Elizabeth Connell Prize International Singing Competition. And Swedish soprano Nina Stemma was awarded San Francisco Opera Medal, the San Francisco Opera Medal, following the opening performance of the company's current production of Die Frau ohne Schatten.
And speaking of Die Frau ohne Schatten, as everyone always is, Camilla Newland, Nina Stemma, and Linda Watson took a break from their leading roles to sit down with the Associated Press, and it turns out they cannot explain the plot either. This means our dear friend of the show, Harry Rose, is the only person alive who can decode this symbolist fairy tale. Nina Stemma, time to check out our archives.
I assume she's already a devoted listener. In trade news, Malmo Opera has appointed Christina Handel to be the company's new CEO and artistic director. Meanwhile, Jan Latham Koenig has been appointed artistic director of the festival Puccini. The conductor is the current music director of Teatro Cologne and the founder and artistic director of the Britain Shostakovich Festival Orchestra.
On the disabled list, Jamie Barton has announced on social media that she had to withdraw from some performances of Royal Opera House's production of Il Trovatore after testing positive for COVID. Said Barton, "Y'all, it's not Azucena-level drama, but your girl's been going through it a bit herself. A chest cold that required 5 days of full vocal rest, gnarly food poisoning the night before opening, the worst seasonal allergies I've ever seen, and now a positive COVID test. Please consider this your friendly reminder that COVID is still a thing, and take care."
And on this day, June 12th, there were a few birthdays, which include French bass Paul Plançon, born this day in 1854, and the Scottish composer and conductor Oliver Newson, born in 1952. A number of first performances include Francesco Cavalli's Ipermestra in 1658, Antonio Salieri's Armida in 1771, Gaspare Spontini's Agnes von Hohenstaufen in 1829, two by Jacques Offenbach, La Rose de Saint-Fleur, the Saint-Flower, in 1856, and Les Bavards in 1862. More French opera include Camille Saint-Saëns' La Princesse Jaune, premiering in 1872, and then Hans Wittner's Palestrina with Bruno Walter conducting in 1917. A Polish opera, the Polish opera, Karl Szymanowski's King Roger, premiered in Warsaw in 1926. One for Weston Prokofiev's War and Peace, premiering in Leningrad in 1946. Leonard Bernstein's Trouble in Tahiti premiered in 1952 with the composer conducting. Bohuslav Martinu's The Greek Passion premiered in Zurich in 1961. In 1964, Benjamin Britten's Parable for church performance, Curlew River, premiered in the Orfer Church of Alderborough. And a bizarre one, 1971, the first performance of an opera by Schubert, yes, Franz Schubert, his unfinished opera Sakuntala in Vienna.
And that is your 2-minute drill.
Just heard a clip from at least one, if not two, hidden gems of opera. That was Anita Cerquetti singing the aria from Gaspare Spontini's Agnes von Hohenstaufen. She is just a singer who is not recorded nearly enough, but there is at least one studio set of a Gioconda. How could I forget La Gioconda? But an Italian dramatic soprano who retired really early, and so there's just not a lot of recordings of her, but it's like a pretty phenomenal voice, and you can hear that the Spontini aria like really highlights just the way that she can sing in these long lines that just continue to arch and go like up and up and up in a way that like more dramatic sopranos don't always necessarily sound.
Yeah, but I always feel like the voice has a lot of darkness and it feels very heavy. And like
yes.
when a voice that dark tries to do that much bel canto, I feel like, ooh, are you sure that's the type of music you want to be singing? So
I like a little bit of darkness in my bel canto. Of course, I also like War and Peace by Sergei Prokofiev. So, I have expensive tastes. This is just one of those weeks, folks, where there's not a lot to talk about. And I'm just like avoiding the one important story because I don't want to talk about Robert Beezer. But here we are. We have to talk about Robert Beezer. Who wants to talk about Robert Beezer?
He's out.
He's out.
And Juilliard is quite tight-lipped about the details.
Very much so. Yeah, a lot of these, the results of this investigation is very, vague and, very kind of, sidesteppy, avoiding it feels like avoiding a lot of responsibility. I mean, I do think that's probably the right call based on what we know about what happened.
That report we did cover back in December of 2022 when it dropped, and it was pretty bad about kinds of things that students of his of both him and another one of his colleagues in the composition department at Juilliard, Christopher Rouse, who is no longer alive.
It's pretty bad. There's a lot of, harassment, inappropriate relationships, lots of stuff. I think that the big thing to remember is that, Juilliard did say they did an investigation back when some of these allegations first cropped up, 10 years ago or so. And just kind of, brushed it right under the rug a little bit is kind of the impression that people have gotten. So I'm glad that this one is sticking to some degree. Of course, I should say Beezer's lawyer is saying that, they're going to fight this. This isn't, true, but
he wouldn't be worth his retainer if he didn't say that. But you don't necessarily put a lot of stock in those kinds of after the fact statements.
Exactly. And, it's just one of those things, it's one of those situations where Juilliard is such a big backbone of the classical music world here in the U.S. and beyond the U.S. And I think it's good that he's been fired if this investigation has been borne out properly. And I think that hopefully we can move on, making sure that they center their responsibility as an institution for these sorts of things going forward. So,
I mean, it's a lot easier to fire somebody like that who is not like a marquee name, like for audiences, like maybe
right,
Juilliard,
exactly.
He's like a big name, but when you think about what the Met had to go through with James Levine, like they're talking about whatever, 30 years of legacy, 40 years of his legacy,
and not just legacy, but like being the centerpiece of like a lot of their marketing and and merchandise in particular, with the recordings that they often would like really hype his name.
Yeah. So we are going to report next week about what happens at Cardiff. It is sort of bizarre that this year there are no Americans. Usually we can cheer for somebody. It's sort of like our Eurovision over there, but we're completely knocked out. We do have some representation on the conducting front, friend of the show, Michael Christie.
And it's fortunately not 100% Eurovision, since there are a couple contestants from South Korea and South Africa.
Nice. Do you, by any chance, do you have any names you want to throw out so we can at least acknowledge them before they make it?
There's two tenors from South Korea, tenor Byung-jin Angelo Kim, as well as Sung Ho Kim. And from South Africa, there's a mezzo-soprano Sipokazi Molteno and soprano Nombulelo Yende.
Well, we're hoping one of them wins in revenge again for the countertenors and Americans out there.
Yeah. So we want a brown to win, or like a non-white person to win. That's what we're saying.
Unless it's the tenor from Ukraine, Vasyl Sodiki. They can have that victory. Okay. I mean, any victory for Ukraine is also fine. But other than that, no Europeans. That's what we're calling. We're calling our shot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Who needs Europe? Who needs it?
Europe, you had your chance already. So.
I was speaking of Europe and like institutions that are archaic and silly. I want to talk a little bit about Jonathan Sumption, Lord Sumption. You got to get the comma in there.
A name that I did read as Lord Sumpington for the first 3 times through that article, which is somehow even more ridiculous.
It's so funny. I just love the straight facedness with the headlines like this. Like, Lord Sumption has resigned from the board, you know. Now, I will say I agree with him that, you know, I think Arts Council England, of course, is doing a pretty atrocious job of cutting funding. Well, a good job at cutting funding. A pretty atrocious job of, like, you know, forcing these funding cuts and making ENO move. And I do think it's going to hurt ENO in the long run.
And they're just one of a long list of organizations that are really hurting and threatening, or not even threatening, but warning that they might need to reduce or cease operations. Because they were expecting grants from the government that are not materializing. Yeah,
it didn't make the cut for 2 Minute Drill, but Leeds Leader Festival lost it was something like £60,000, which is or 600,000. Either 60 or 600,000.
It was £60,000.
Either way, a huge amount for them. And, you know, they're all panicking about it over there. And I do think that Sumption has it right when he says that, you know, ACE is a disaster and, like, you know, kind of just cutting and gutting as it goes. I do question his act of protest for, I mean,
yeah,
he is a lord, so he doesn't understand, like, normal people protests. So
this is basically just an open letter.
He's basically doing an open letter and being like, I'm not going to deal with it. Goodbye. I'm going to leave the ENO and hope they can work it out. Because when I first read it, I thought he was like, Lord Sumption has resigned from Arts Council England. That would make sense. But no, he was on the board of ENO and he's just kind of like abandoning ship, which I think is, you know, very Lord Sumption of him. Yeah, this is a developing story that we've been following for, you know, months and months now. It doesn't seem to be getting a heck of a lot better. You know, I think some pushback has resulted in, like, some small incremental gains. But as the new seasons start to pop up and this funding stops materializing for these organizations, Arts Council England is continuing to just, you know, do a pretty good job of being terrible. Let's wrap the show up.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, a bad call. That's how we end each and every show here on Opera Box Score, even when George isn't here. Let's start with...
It's our good call.
George isn't here. Good call. Oliver Camacho, are you going to stick with that, or is...
yeah, that's fine. Let's
cool.
keep some things intact. So I spent 6 days in Boston, and I saw most of Boston Early Music Festival. I missed the opening Sunday and the closing Sunday, but I think I saw just about every operatic performance that I could, including sitting down for Desmarais' Circé twice. I loved it that much. I'm a French Baroque opera guy, as you know.
What?
I have to say that, you know, if you are in this company, they are really like a troupe. They make you work hard. For example, Amanda Forsyth, friend of the show, has one of the lead roles in Circé. She also sang in a concert on Monday night, arias from Almira, which was their production in 2013. And then she had a Saturday night concert, one of the last concerts I saw, which was a trio concert with Cecilia Duarte and Dorothée Miels and the Continuo section of the Boston Early Music Festival Opera Orchestra. So basically, she had something to do every single night of the week, maybe with one night off. And Hannah DePriest, a local soprano here in Chicago, was called to the festival to understudy Karina Gauvin because the originally announced Circé title character, Lucille Richardot, had a family emergency. And so Karina Gauvin had to come in and learn this role and couldn't make it for the first week of rehearsal. So Hannah DePriest had to learn it in addition to the role she was already cast in, which was Amor, or Cupid, in the opera. Plus, she was in various concerts, including a non-Bemf concert that week Les Délices, a Cleveland-based period instrument band. So she's another artist who had like something to do basically every day. And I felt like, how could you juggle all these things? How can you keep all this stuff in your head? Dorothee Mills gave 2 concerts. She wasn't in the opera, but she was exquisite both times. And I think we will be getting a free throw from Dorothee Mills upcoming soon. I have to say that, like, I love this place so much. I think that the pandemic did a number on it, and I was sorry to not see full houses for some of these events, which were just some of the most thrilling performances I've seen ever. I think what happened is they went to this online model, and they taught their audiences that they could enjoy these things from home, because they continue to offer online viewing. And I also think that because they're a biennial festival, it's one of those things, like, you miss it, 1 year, suddenly it's 4 years since you've had your audience, in Boston. And it's one of those, like, forgotten, or not seen, forgotten, whatever the adage is for something like that, So I hope that they can come back in 2025 with a more robust attendance. It really was heartbreaking to see some half-full audiences for some of those concerts. And I can scoop right now something that is exclusive for our audience members. The 2025 festival opera will be Reinhard Kaiser's Octavia. So all you Octavia fans, finally, this is your moment.
The Marshallin will be first in line.
Yeah. And if you are a potential young artist, start learning your Octavia now. Go to the what do they call the M2s? I forget what libraries are. Is it the M2s? Matt, you're closest to academia, where you will find full editions of things like in a good music library that are not performing editions.
Are you gonna have to read through like all the long S's and figure out what?
I was talking about, like, in a music library, they have like the complete works of Handel, the complete works of Purcell, and like that's, if you browse through there, you'll eventually find like these, Telemann or Kaiser operas that there's no performing editions, but there is like the full score. So
like Sakuntala.
Exactly. So anyway, go look up your Octavias and work on your German for the 2025 festival. Yes.
And all you audience members out there, remember, streaming on the internet is not historically informed performance. Matt Cummings.
I've got a bit of a bad call, and it is to a write-up that Zachary Wolfe did in the Times about the end of the Met season. And it reads, it's called The End of an Era. It's the end of an era at the Metropolitan Opera. And I hope that the conclusion of his piece is not right, which he is, noticing that the Met next year had to rate its endowment, is scaling back the number of operas that they're doing from 22 to 18, and that they are, that there's a total cut to the number of performances as well. That is 10% fewer performances, with about a 20-ish% cut in the number of shows that they're doing, which, if you do the math, means that they're doing more performances of each show. But it's being presented as like an unambiguously bad thing. And I'm just not sure that some of the evidence that he draws from in this piece like really can bear that weight. Saying that one of the... he calls out that they're retiring this production of Aida by Sonia Frizzell from the 1980s. And I don't want to put words in his mouth and say that he's actually calling this a bad thing, because that isn't what it says. But to bemoan the end of an era that involved a production of Aida that originally was done in blackface and continued to be done in blackface until very recently, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And he also, kind of speculates that if this kind of scaling back of doing revivals of old repertory productions, like if this were to continue, then you might not get highlights of the season like Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. And while that is true, while it's true that would be a bad thing, like that was a very highly publicized production. So it just reads to me like some of these. Some of the evidence of this being the end of an era and like or any kind of, turning point. The evidence is just very cherry picked.
It's got some boomer energy to to it.
In a way that I really don't associate.
But he's a
with-
millennial, I think.
I know.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a weird vibe off of that article.
Yeah. And, part of that is because it's hard to review an entire season of a repertory company in 500 words or however long he had
Fair.
to write this piece. And I really do hope that some of the negative trends in some of the negative data points in next season do not continue to be trends. Like, it would be bad if they had to keep rating their endowment. It would be bad if the number of operas that they perform every year keeps creeping lower and lower and lower. But the fact that that 1/3 of the productions that they're staging next year are new works, not premieres, but like new operas, and that they are expanding the repertory of this house, it's presenting that as a bad thing, and I just don't know that I buy that as an interpretation of what is going on here.
Well, that's what happens when you have a slow news week. We get articles like that. Exactly.
Literally. And it's funny that you happen to use that as your bad call there, because my good call is actually associated with the Met's upcoming programming. It was announced that the Met is actually going to present Kaya Sarajevo's Innocence in the 25-26 season. And if you, all you listeners, go back and listen to the tribute we put together for Sarajevo last week, you'll know why that's such an exciting thing for me. That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot takes at operaboxscore@gmail.com. Find links to stuff we've talked about on our website at operaboxscore.com. And that's also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to OBS on our donate page. Your announcer is Norm Waddell, your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho, and your audio editor is me. For co-host Matt Cummings and our guest Jonathan Woody, I'm Weston Williams, asking you to continue the conversation about opera's very hidden gems on this slow news week. We're back with an all-new show next week when we reveal who wins the Dame Kyrie te Conwa Audience Prize at Cardiff. Plus, you get more opera headlines, if there are any, more hot takes, and more psychosocial risk protocols. Join us.